In one of our last classes, we were looking at the influence of Italian mannerism on painters in Harlem. Remember that Carl van Mander had gone down to Rome, where he had met Bartolomeo Spronger, who was already living there, and it was Spronger who had been assimilating various stylistic influences from a number of Italian painters, and he passes this idea on to Carl van Mander, who then takes it back to Harlem, where we see Goltzius doing an engraving based on figures that were originally invented by Bartolomeo Spronger, in fact giving him credit in the inscription at the bottom. Uh, we're going to look at Utrecht in this screencast. We'll come back to Harlem toward the end of it. But we see, as we look at art in Utrecht, the same sort of erotic mannerism that came from Bartolomeo Spronger, also influencing artists in Utrecht. Utrecht and Harlem are quite close together, and there's quite a bit of cross sort of pollination of ideas between Harlem and Utrecht. And so Udevall, Joachim Udevall, is very much influenced by Bartolomeo Spronger as well, with this sort of healthy eroticism and these images of the loves of the gods, which were common in Mannerist paintings. Both of these show Mars fooling around with Venus. Venus was the wife of Vulcan, who kept the fire of the earth. And in Goltzius's image, Apollo is in the background, and he has seen this, despite Cupid's best efforts to keep it hidden. And he's flying away to tell Vulcan. In Udevall's painting, we see a slightly later uh, image from the story, a slightly later scene, where Vulcan's coming through the door on the right, about to catch them in the act, and he's going to throw this metal mesh net over them that he's forged in his fire that you see behind him. Down in the lower right corner, you see Mars's arms, because love has disarmed war. Mars is the god of war, of course. And you see that same motif in Goltzius's work as well. So here we see that same sort of late Mannerist styling that came from Bartolomeo Spronger via Carl van Mander into Harlem, and then from Harlem we see it translate into Utrecht as well. Other artists are picking up on this very elegant, Spronger-inspired body type and posturing. Abraham Blumart, uh, less erotic, certainly, than Udevall's picture, but if we look at the brightly keyed artificial colors, the posture, especially the fellow on the right-hand border in yellow, or the one behind him in pink. Um, Even with this religious image, we see that sort of mannered elegance that's typical of Mannerist style that has now come to Utrecht as well. So this is one current of Italian influence in the art of Utrecht. The more famous and certainly stronger influence from Italy into Utrecht art is from Caravaggio. And in fact, Hendrik Terbruggen was one of three painters from Utrecht who traveled to Rome around 1610 and saw Caravaggio's pictures, which were at that point sort of the newest thing, and brought these ideas back with them to Utrecht in the late teens or just before 1620. Caravaggio is on the right. We talked about Caravaggio when we talked about Baroque art in general, his use of the dramatic close-up, his use of the darkened interior with the spotlight, simplifying the composition and highlighting the figures, his use of extreme levels of textural realism, with this particular scene of St. Thomas, who won't believe until he touches the wound in Christ's side, that palpable textural realism becomes an important part of the story. We can imagine feeling the skins of the three apostles, Thomas and the two others on the right, just as he feels the skin of Christ as he pushes his finger into the side and opens it a little bit and even pushes the skin back. touch is an important part of this picture, and Caravaggio uses his realism to pick that up. Terbruggen had seen this picture before returning to the Low Countries, and has done a sort of dramatic re-envisioning of this. It's still in half length. Some of the figures seem similar in pose and even in features, clothing and whatnot, but you'll notice it's somewhat brighter. The background is better lit. You'll have to forgive the sunlight on the corner of the picture, but you'll also notice that the colors are brighter. There's a larger range of colors. And this is typical of Terbruggen's translations of Caravaggio's designs, is that they get somewhat better lit and certainly brighter in coloration. Uh, at the same time, it's not a slavish following, right? He's not doing copies of Caravaggio. He's doing revisions of those compositions in new ways. Now, what struck these painters about Caravaggio, and why would these become popular in Utrecht? Well, it's important to remember that Utrecht was the one province in the Netherlands in the 17th century that remained Catholic. And so there was, in fact, a huge market for these kinds of pictures in Utrecht, even though Terbruggen himself was a Protestant. Right? Our work on the left, the one from the Rijksmuseum, actually came from Amsterdam collection. We painted it for someone who lived in Amsterdam. And we are pretty sure it figured as an altarpiece in what we call a clandestine church. The Dutch are very tolerant, and even though they were Protestant, they tolerated Catholicism so long as it didn't harm anybody, including the state. And they allowed Catholics to practice, but more or less in, well or not too well kept secret. So they would convert parts of their houses into these attic churches, and we're going to go visit one. This is our beloved Lord in the attic, a Catholic church that's now a museum in a 17th century house in Amsterdam. Terbruggen's work came from something quite similar to that, a kind of a clandestine church in Amsterdam. So there were Catholic patrons everywhere, even though this following of Caravagism, is really strong in Utrecht because of its Catholicism. We find these works having wide-ranging appeal because there were Catholic patrons in other provinces. We also know that other people are interested in Catholic ideas, but not necessarily for Catholic reasons. Rembrandt was very much interested in the Book of Tobit, which is in the Catholic version of the Old Testament, not in the Protestant version. And this whole interest in it comes from his interest in the story and storytelling. So not all Catholic subjects, or particularly Catholic styles like Caravaggio, they didn't only appeal to Catholics. Another Terbruggen, The Calling of St. Matthew, also very much influenced by Caravaggio. Here again, he puts it into half length rather than full length, and you can, as you look at them side by side, first you notice the same stock player in both. The fellow with the glasses leaning in to see what's going on, but where Christ comes in from the right with probably St. Andrew in Caravaggio's picture, Terbruggen puts him on the left, and we sort of follow him, which is a fascinating thing. We become one of Christ's followers as he now encounters St. Matthew, who looks toward him, and on a certain level, he looks toward us as well. But still, you can notice the degree to which this is a revision of Caravaggio's ideas. So our fellow here that appeared in the other pictures, obviously inspired by one of Caravaggio's pictures, and yet at the same time, it's not a direct copy. Right? It's also brighter, not as shadowy as Caravaggio's works, thus giving us more details in the background, all of the accounts nailed to the wall. But in addition to that, the colors are significantly brighter in Terbruggen's work than they are in Caravaggio's, which tend to have a very sort of limited color range around earth tones. And Terbruggen has a much brighter, fuller palette that's typical of a lot of the Utrecht painters who followed in the footsteps of Caravaggio. Not true all the time, but often. Another Terbruggen of St. Peter being freed from prison by the angel. I don't know of a Caravaggio of this exact same image, but you'll notice that the figure of St. Peter in Terbruggen's liberation scene looks very similar to St. Peter in this Caravaggio, where he's still holding his fish at the moment that Caravaggio appears to him to call him as one of his followers. So Terbruggen is one of our major followers of Caravaggio in Utrecht. Like I said, there were three of them. The second of these painters is Dirk van Baburen, who had also gone to Italy in the 1610s, had seen works by Caravaggio, and in fact, very similar to what Terbruggen does. He takes Caravaggio's inspiration and he simply reworks the theme, regroups the figures, changes it around a little bit. Uh, so the image of the Virgin Mary weeping in blue uh, here directly translates a figure from Caravaggio, but again, shifting her pose and shifting her focus. The body of Christ is pretty much in a similar position, but it has now been shifted around. We have the corner of the gravestone in Caravaggio at the bottom of the image, and here we see the corner of the of the tomb directly beneath the hip of Christ. All of these things are I wouldn't say ripping off, but borrowing from Caravaggio. People loved this. This is a huge work. It's around 7 feet tall. The Baburin is. And it's a copy of one that he had done for one of the churches in Rome when he was there. He got a commission. And then he made another copy for a patron in the Low Countries after having returned. Our painters will translate these scenes into non-religious images as well. Another Baburin in the Rijksmuseum showing Prometheus, who stole the fire from the forge of Vulcan to give it to mankind, to make a gift of it to man. And Vulcan catches him, and he and Mercury get together and decide to punish him. So they chain him to a stone where his fate, his punishment, is to have his liver pecked out by an eagle, which you see in the upper left corner. And then every night his liver grows back, and the eagle comes back the next day to do it again. So it's absolutely horrific. There's an incredible amount of realism in the work. You'll notice the tanning on the hands and the head, almost as if Baburin is taking his models and drawing them directly as he sees them. But then that face of Prometheus, the terror in his eyes, mirrors a figure from Caravaggio, where Holofernes is in the midst of having his head cut off by Judas in this Old Testament scene on the right. Again, taking Caravaggio's images, moving them around a bit and translating them into new purposes. Our third Caravaggio-inspired artist in Utrecht is Gerrit van Honthorst. Again, from the Rijksmuseum on your left, Christ crowned with thorns being tormented by soldiers and others around him. So not only do we have them pushing the thorns down on his head with those sticks, which you can see borrows from this Caravaggio, but now moves it to full figure rather than half figure, a figure seen from the back on the left. Christ suffering with dignity as these figures ram the thorns down on him. And then Honthorst, not only does he brighten up the color, adding lots more blues into it, also adds the source of light, which is common in many of his works. You'll see the torch directly behind the figure, kneeling down in front of us, who's sticking his tongue out at Jesus, while the other one takes his horn and blares it in Jesus' ear. Figure in the upper left corner, almost as if pointing to us exactly what's going on here. Right? And then there's the stick in Jesus' hand, which again seems to be conventional coming out of Caravaggio's works. Again, this work is massive. It's over 7 feet tall, and again, it certainly comes from one of these clandestine Catholic churches, who seem to be a major patron for these larger Caravaggio-inspired works coming out of artists from Utrecht. Now, these artists from Utrecht are not only looking at Caravaggio's religious works, but they're also looking at some of his more secular images of Roman gods. On the right, what some people think is a self-portrait of Caravaggio as Bacchus having drunk himself sick, holding his grapes as a symbol of him, but blue in the lips as he's gone a little queasy from the work. And Honthorst is not really borrowing from this work directly, but he certainly is borrowing from the sensual eroticism that is typical of a lot of Caravaggio's non-religious pictures. Arguably, it's there in some of the religious pictures as well. Caravaggios are extremely erotic, but so is Honthorst's. So this satyr is one of the followers of Bacchus, half man, half goat, and he's tickling the chin of a nymph, sort of a spirit of the woods, as he tickles her chin, and of course her clothes are conveniently falling off, and she's yanking on his beard in a rather phallic way, and he's certainly intended to be excited. His nipples are erect, for example. It's kind of embarrassing to look at. And in addition to that, he's got that branch that's covering up his private parts, which we are left to assume are also excited in this image. So it becomes a sort of extraordinarily erotic scene that also owes its genesis to Honthorst's Italian studies of a wide range of works by Caravaggio. Here with Caravaggio lighting, another extraordinarily erotic scene, a genre scene, if you will, a scene of everyday life. This is a visit to a prostitute. And there can be really no doubt here of what's going on. First, you'll notice Honthorst loves the hidden candle behind the shoulder of the man, including the light source within the image. But if you look closely, you'll notice he's got a money bag in his left hand, and his right hand's got some coins. And as he reaches over, he's offering them to the red-faced young girl, who's not embarrassed at all, and quite obviously not embarrassed because of her clothing. This is a transaction. She is a prostitute. And it's called the procuress because the procuress is the madam in the piece who stands behind the young man's left shoulder. But you'll notice a couple of things I'd like to point to. One, it's a very Caravaggio kind of setting. There isn't a particular work that this borrows from, but it looks like the kind of setting we become accustomed to in a lot of Caravaggio images, and the lighting is totally Caravaggio as well. But I want you to pay particular attention to the lute. She's got a massive lute there. One of the things that we find in literature of the time, 17th century, as well as in the significant number of pictures, is the degree to which lutes are associated with the women's body. That men playing lutes takes on an erotic overtone in the same way that a woman playing a pipe might in reverse. A man who strums the lute is a man who strokes the body of a woman in the same way that a woman who plays a pipe obviously has Freudian erotic overtones, right? So there's no doubt of what's going on here. In the background is the procuress that I mentioned, the madam of the whorehouse, who is, like many figures in these Caravaggio images, is pointing to what we should be paying attention to, what is going on here in the central theme. Her face and her headband are, in fact, based directly on the Caravaggio, the one we just saw, Judas and Holofernes, where Holofernes' servant coming in from your right with the bag for the head of Holofernes now is translated by Van Honthorst into this image of a house of prostitution. So what he gives us is this idea that a woman with a musical instrument is offering herself to this man as part of the exchange, and the procuress is there to oversee the transaction. What is an open question is whether or not those themes occur when we lose some of the specifying details. So in this case, instead of a lute, we have a violin. We don't have anybody offering money. We don't have a procuress telling us what to look like, but we do have a young woman who seems quite similar in ways to the woman in the procuress. Her clothes revealing significantly more of her shoulders and breasts than is decorous, engaging directly and happily, a similar look on her face. But in this particular picture, we've become the one who's being asked to engage. we become the one who's being asked to offer up the money, if you will, or at least to participate on one level or another. And this becomes sort of this fascinating thing about these images, is as they are incredibly engaging. What does it mean to engage? Are we a customer for a prostitute? Uh, we are certainly being asked to participate on one level or another. Not only Honthorst, but really all three of our Utrecht Caravaggio followers borrow from numerous compositions by Caravaggio, these non-religious pictures by Caravaggio. So here, Baburin has a merry lute player, which is his translation of the lute player by Caravaggio. Again, there's this question of what does it mean to participate? Are we meant to sing with him, or are we just watching him perform? With Caravaggio's image, there's a violin with its handle coming toward us, suggesting that we're supposed to play along. We're supposed to participate with him. At the same time, with the lute that he plays, it adds that overlay of eroticism, and his loose-fitting cotton shirt bearing a shoulder, not unlike the Honthorst we just saw, also adds a certain erotic overtone. For Caravaggio, a certain homoerotic overtone to the image. Are those still there when we look at Dirk van der Buren's picture in Utrecht? And that's an open-ended question. How are we supposed to participate with these images? Are we supposed to join in? And if so, what does that mean? Caravaggio gives us an image of Bacchus offering us a beautiful glass of wine from his pitcher with fruits in front of him. And again, here, Bacchus, of course, is the god of wine. What does participation mean? And Caravaggio definitely overlays it with a layer of sexuality. That participating with the wine will lead to other carnal activities. Terbruggen picks up on this. His merry drinker is wearing this quite nice bit of clothing, but you'll notice that it has conveniently fallen off his shoulders. He doesn't have the same sort of youthful androgyny that Caravaggio's figures have, and kind of ugly as well, with those teeth and his sagging chest, his kind of scraggly beard and mottled up chin. He has none of the youthful beauty of Caravaggio's Bacchus, and that really kind of complicates the story in a way. Because it almost as if the idea of participating with this gent is a warning of sorts. Where does drinking lead? Is drinking a fruitful activity, or is it a wasteful activity? And it seems that with this particular picture, the wastefulness of drinking and what it does to one's decorum seems to be part of the image at hand. But again, it's a reworking, as we've seen so common, of these ideas that came out of studying Caravaggio's works while these painters had been in Rome. So these pictures are giving us this question of what are the moral implications of joining into the activities that we're witnessing. What is the effect of those activities on the people who partake in them? When we look at another work by Van Honthorst, which certainly derives out of the Caravaggio tradition, although significantly more joyful, the idea of being offered a glass of wine and other sensory pleasures, sensual pleasures, is here translated by Van Honthorst. Instead of fruits and the soft shoulder, we get music and tapestry and a wonderful sort of stone window out of which the figure seems to lean directly into our space. He's certainly asking us to come and join him. But the question, of course, remains, what does that mean? What are the implications of joining in? And I don't think that these pictures are particularly heavy-handed in telling us specifically. I think sometimes they leave it open to our interpretation, with the idea that an owner might look at it as a celebratory picture, at the same time might look at it as a moral warning. One of the best known of these kinds of pictures, that ambiguous invitations to participate, comes from Frans Hals. And here again we see how themes that were being done in Utrecht on your left have a really strong parallel with works that are being done in Haarlem on your right. And this is where Frans Hals was active, was indeed in Haarlem. Uh, One of the ways to add some context to this question of what it means to participate is to look at the kinds of paintings that were being done in Haarlem, um, also in Utrecht for that matter, at the times that Frans Hals and Hontorf were painting these things. Were there other images that might give us better insight into the attitude of what it means to participate in sensory pleasure? And indeed, we find that there are. There was, in fact, a convention in Haarlem painting of these scenes that we call merry companies, elegant companies, that show figures in a garden or in an interior participating in a very elegant feast, dressed to the nines, dressed in all of their finery. And part of the convention of these kinds of pictures that were common in Haarlem is to have a couple coming in from the side who are about to participate but haven't yet made their mind up. They've come to this garden party and they're entering in the same way that you and I are entering in with our eyes, and they're deciding what are they going to do next. Are they going to join in with the festivities of this elegant meal with all of these extraordinarily expensive trappings, or might they decide to turn around and leave? If you look at how the two women are dressed, with the men here on the right, with that plunging cleavage, it sort of begins to suggest to us that indeed we know what their decision is going to be, that they are here to participate in something sensual. And as we move our way into the picture visually, we find that the table is set with extraordinarily fine things, things that are appeal to our senses, things that are set for extraordinarily expensive and festive meals. We have oysters on the half shell, knives coming off the table, almost as if it's out there for us to take. There's a pheasant pie. It was typical to take the pheasant's body and put it on top of the crust, on top of the pie as you served it. So that bird in the background, the round bit on the bottom, contains the meat of the pie cooked in the stew inside of a bread bowl, and the top of it is now the body of the pheasant. And as we look around, we see other sort of wonderful things that appeal to our different senses. And the question is this a good thing or a bad thing, or is it neutral? And this is the point of some debate, but sometimes these artists will put things in it that suggest that it's not entirely neutral. That in fact, eating food and participating here really is about carnal desire. So on the far side of the table, a man is beginning to embrace a woman. In the foreground, he's got his foot on top of hers. She's leaning into his chair. But you'll also notice that there's a monkey down there, a sort of anthropomorphized monkey at their feet. Monkeys, when we see them in pictures, are immediate clues that the people and their activities are foolish, that mockery is going on here. Apery is an old school term in Dutch and in English for mockery. Aping someone's actions is to imitate them foolishly. And the appearance of the monkey at their feet is most certainly an appearance that's intended to suggest that these people are misbehaving, that this is foolish behavior. And I think on a certain level, the dogs in the foreground, one of whom lays next to the unplayed lute, obediently somewhat. The other one sniffing at the fountain, uh, misbehaving. They sort of tie into this overall reading of the picture, the moralizing scene. Um, like I said, this had become quite the convention in Harlem around 1610. This is Franz Hall's older brother, and another of these elegant or merry companies, these high life pictures with extraordinarily finely dressed aristocrats. And you'll notice that the layout is quite similar. Figure seems to come in from the right. There's a dandy dressed gent there looking out at us directly. And they're entering into this scene where the question is, what does it mean to enter into the scene? What does it mean to participate? Now you'll notice that they already are participating. He's tuning the lute, which of course I guess we could say that's erotic, isn't it? If the lute is a well-known symbol for a woman's body, then tuning the lute can really only mean one thing. And he's looking out at us. There are 3 women and 3 men here, so it's definitely about pairing up. And you'll notice that the woman is playing a pipe. So, Freud said that sometimes a pipe is just a pipe, but not here. That's definitely, again, adding to this overall erotic content of joining in with the song, joining in with the music, joining in with the eating and the drinking. All of this seems to have an overtly sensualized meaning in these works. On the left-hand side, we don't have equal couples. In fact, we have 2 women and 3 men. And it's almost as if all 3 men are hitting on the same woman. Maybe the guy in the back is sort of with his wife, and the other 2 are trying to woo that one girl, one from the back and one from the front. And the dogs that Dirk Hall includes in the foreground, one sniffing the other one's butt, only emphasizes what the overall meaning here is, that they're horn dogging each other in this image. And going back to these images that offer us drink, all of this is picked up by little details, right? There are couples everywhere, but there's a huge fountain, and the figure that sits on top of the fountain is Bacchus, the god of wine, which we saw in that Caravaggio picture, holding out a glass of wine as if to offer it. So this underscores the idea that many of the things we saw in those Utrecht and Harlem pictures of revelers asking us to join in, they come with some baggage. Right? And the question for us remains, is that baggage still there when you isolate the figure, when you get rid of the rest of the trappings? You just have a guy with a glass, right? A woman with an empty glass pouring beer. When you have images like this, is the meaning the same? Since you don't have the rest of the picture to add to it. You'll notice with the innkeeper, she's probably not a portrait of an innkeeper, kind of looks like Sean Penn. But on the background behind her, there's a violin hanging there, so there's music. Over to the right of her head on the wall, she's actually taken chalk and she's marked off how many drinks she's poured for you already. So you're pretty deep in already, right? It's marking tallies, and then like the way you mark 5, 4 with a slash. But we're going top to bottom here. She's about to pour you another drink. And of course, with the Jolly Topher, he's asking us, do you want here? Take mine. And all of them are very much about participating. And with each of these, I think that certainly the Calvinist idea of moderation underscores how we interpret these pictures. With the Jolly Topher, we haven't started drinking yet, so we still have every chance to practice moderation. With the innkeeper, we're pretty deep, right? And so the question is, are we morally implicit? Is it honey? Are the conventions of society to say not to have too much? Are they being mocked here? Is this satire? Again, there's not enough here that give us anything that suggests a single reading of this picture. Unlike Franz's older brother, Dirk, who usually gives us the rest of this narrative that helps us then to understand exactly what we're looking at and how we should interpret it, right? Another Franz Hall, some of these images, right, there are a lot of them about drinking. also get to the point where we're thinking about them like it's like it's too late for these figures. He's looking down into the bottom of the pot and it's empty, and there's no more to drink because he's drank it all. So when we look at these images, we think of the Dutch interest in moderation, especially in Calvinist Holland. We have to keep in mind that these pictures may all relate to that idea, but do so in different ways and put us at different places in that participation, right? Or at least cast the characters there in different places in that participation. Other painters in Haarlem picked up the same ideas. This was a convention. These single figures derived from those merry companies, picking up elements from Caravaggio. This was not only being done by Frans Hals, not only being done by those painters in Utrecht, but other painters in Haarlem as well. Judith Leister, one of our few women artists from the 17th century that we have any is extraordinary because they were excluded from most training sessions that men might have had, the academy and whatnot. But here she picks up the same theme that Frans Hals did of the happy drinker, the jolly toper. But with the outlandish feather in his cap, he has been associated with a comic theater figure named Peckel Haring. Peckel Haring was, it means pickled herring. You can eat them. We can when we're there. It's a Dutch delicacy of sorts, although a lowbrow delicacy, like like a corn dog or something like that. It's exactly the sort of thing you get at a county fair. Um, and the character of Peckel Haring derives from Italian comedies, and they performed regularly at festivals. Things like Fat Tuesday, right, Mardi Gras, or midsummer festivals in street theaters that were put up as part of county fairs and whatnot, religious fairs that became sort of secularized in these huge village party gatherings. And Peckel Haring was a drunkard, uh, extraordinarily thirsty all the time, and in the plays, whenever he ran out of drink, it meant the play was over. So these figures that are looking down into the bottom of the empty drink make reference to that uh, theatrical comic theater idea, right? And the feather in Judith Leister's figure in his hat suggests that he's in fact a theatrical figure. The interesting thing about this kind of comedy, this kind of theater that was popular in Holland in the 17th century is that it's Peckel Haring would always be Peckel Haring. You would change the narrative around, there'd be different stories, and he always plays the same character. And what he does as a drunken fool is somehow he is smarter than the supposedly smart people in the play. That's how the comedy works, right? These people think they're smart, but they do really stupid things. And Peckel Haring stands off to the side and comments on this and goes, "You, how stupid they are, right? Look at this. You wouldn't do something like this." And he somehow, as the narrator fool, he's somehow smarter than the other people in the audience. And this idea that you would recognize him right away and you would know the role he's going to play, regardless of how the narrative might work out. He'd always be the fool on the side, getting drunk. He'd never be anyone else. It made the comedies work. The only modern analogy, the best modern analogy I can think of, and it may be lost on some of you, is the Marx Brothers from the 1930s and 40s. In every single Marx Brothers movie, Groucho on your right was Groucho. He had exactly the same costume. He played exactly the same character, but his name was changed. Chico next to him, always the same character, always played the sort of womanizing Italian immigrant. Harpo on your left was mute and wore the top hat and was and got away with things. But they always played the exact same character in every movie. Zeppo in the middle was the straight man, right? And what's fascinating about this comparison, just by luck, is that they're all in barrels of pickled herring, kippered herring. So they're showing their indebtedness to this old comic tradition. Now, not all of Judith Leister's images were as broad and funny as this, these images of everyday life. Sometimes they took on much more serious themes that sort of went back to some of the things we saw with the Utrecht painters, but translate them in a different way. Here, a woman working diligently with needlepoint, sewing at night. We know it's diligence because of the burning candle. Working right into the light, she has her feet on a nifty little coal box, a foot warmer, that are fairly common themes. And as she's busy working, this man comes in to disturb her, invades her space. And look what he's doing. He's offering her money. So what's he offering her money for? He's not buying the needlework. He has his hand on her shoulder. He wants her to stop being diligent and start being frisky. And he's mistaking her for a prostitute, when in fact there is nothing about her costume that suggests that that's what she is. She's very primly dressed. Maybe this is somewhat funny. How could anyone mistake this woman for a prostitute? Furthermore, as a woman artist, then, there's a wonderful perspective. Leave me alone. I'm working. I'm not here to have sex with you, regardless of what you offer me, right? And yet he can't see that. He only sees her as an object to try to pursue and to purchase. Uh, Eventually, Judith Leister got married around 1635 or so to the painter Jan Minsa Molenaar. On the left, that's her. That's Judith Leister sitting at the piano playing with two of her kids. She also appears in Jan Minsa Molenaar's self-portrait with his family on the right, and you can see the two kids there that appear in the image on the left, and in the image on the left, it's also Molenaar coming in through the doorway to disturb her while she's making music. But again, this is typical for Haarlem painting, these traditions of music making, of participating in music, and then a sort of moral ambiguity about what taking part uh, in that activity, what it means. Is there any moral implication? You'll notice with the woman on the virginal that there's a couple in the painted lid of the musical instrument. There's a couple walking in the landscape there, and directly above it there's another monkey resting on top of it, which is again meant to signal that there's something more going on here. The last tradition I want to look at with this makeup lecture is the tradition of peasant imagery, peasant frolics. Adrian van Ostade becomes the leading painter of these kinds of images, beginning in Haarlem in the 1620s. And on a certain level, I brought back Dirk Hulst because I think that what van Ostade is doing is he's making fun of the elegant company traditions that had become so popular around 1620, and is now turning that on its ear and giving us a very inelegant company, a group of peasants reveling at a tavern, as an alternative to these images of music-making couples. As we look at these images of peasants carousing at taverns, we notice something, a trajectory that happens over history, that the early ones, like this one, are much louder, are much more boisterous. The couple there kicking up their heels as they dance, the fiddler on the table tapping out the tune, and then when we look behind him, we see people in various stages of drunkenness. As the man on the right downs a very, very large glass of beer while the fellow in blue looks at him. This is a rather noisy, somewhat boisterous interior, and that's typical for Ostade's works in the 1630s or so, that the peasant activity tends to be more uproarious. And I think as we look at these images, we might be invited to participate on a certain level, but at the same time, these become images where the nature of that participation is spelled out pretty clearly for us, that this is not positive behavior. This is not acceptable behavior for the well-heeled classes who might be buying pictures. These peasants are meant to be looked down upon because they are displaying boorishness. They're displaying their lack of class and culture, which would have been humorous and pleasing to the picture-buying public who did not belong to this class of people. So here on the right, the merrymaking peasants are drinking. They've got musical instruments again, the same things we've seen in so many of these pictures, and simply carousing around. And again, just to give us a sense of what is really at hand here, if we look in the shadows on the right past the table, we see a man leaning over, and I think he's throwing up on the ground there, right onto his hands. If not, he's just stumblingly drunk and has fallen off of that stool in front of him. Either way, this is not a positive image. This is not an image of something that we should uh, think that it's neutral to take part in. He continues to do these, Van Ostade does, for a very long career. He's still painting in the 1570s, some 40 years later. And here are more of our carousing peasants, if you will, our ruralites drinking at a tavern, playing music. And again, all of the trappings that we've seen in other pictures, smoking, drinking, playing music. There's nothing really wrong with any of those in moderation. But the question is, with Van Ostade, are we looking at a picture of moderation? Look at the wall behind them. And you can see that they're deep into their cups as well. They've had quite a few, and there's the mark from their innkeeper above his feathered hat that showed just how many drinks they've already had. The same thing we've seen in Frans Hals' innkeeper. So again, these traditions really help us to understand what's going on in these other images that ask us to participate. That does come with moral consequence. And it's difficult for us, um, especially if we think about these as pictures that were owned by people, right? Uh, who wants to own a picture that simply yells at them for doing something wrong? Is there another way to look at these? Is there another way of sort of having fun with them? Because they certainly are merry-making pictures and humorous. Later in his career, in the 1660s and 70s, Van Ostade continues to paint these rural interiors, inns and taverns and whatnot. But as we get later in his career, into the 60s and 70s, the quality of activity seems to tone down quite a bit. And the peasants seem much more sort of respectable. They may well be drinking, but they're not overdoing it. They may well be smoking, right? But it doesn't seem like it's a waste of time. Uh, and we don't have the same sort of tripping, falling, carousing, puking that we saw in the earlier images from the 30s. And it suggests really quite clearly that the attitude toward these pictures seems to have changed somewhat drastically by the time we get to the 1560s. As an interesting analogy for that, Adrian van Ostade gives us a portrait of a painter active in the studio. Probably not a self-portrait because his back is to us, but it still is interesting that he's giving us the impression that he lives in the kind of interior, he works in the kind of interior that he depicts for us, that his painting studio looks just like a peasant inn. Has all of the same trappings. And we see his assistants there in the background grinding paint, loading up his palette for him as he dutifully paints a rustic peasant exterior on the easel here. He's almost as if he's saying, I am one with my paintings. I inhabit my paintings. And we know this isn't true. Here's a portrait of Adrian van Ostade, painted by Frans Hals. They knew each other in Haarlem. And we can see that Van Ostade is every bit the gentleman. Has taken one glove off to shake our hands, dressed in all of his finery, that the image of the painter's studio is a fabrication. A fabrication meant to make us think that he participates in the kind of images he produces. And that becomes an interesting thing on how that affects us as a viewer. Does that make it easier to laugh at it? that he's not telling us what to do. He's saying, hey, we all do this, and let's have a good laugh at it as we sort of make fun of ourselves for the stupid activities that we take part in. So this gives us some background as to what's going on with these early genre pictures, beginning in Utrecht from the influence of Caravaggio, then translating over to Harlem, and really all focusing on this very problematic question with no single answer on how do we as viewers how do we answer the question of whether or not we'll participate? What does it mean to participate in these images? And that's something we'll see other artists bring up as well.